It is 12 noon, so a good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for choosing to spend your Saturday on this webinar. The way I'm going to do this is we have an hour, we have an hour's time. So I'm going to start with a few remarks and then open it up for an interactive session, because I think if I can help answer some of the questions that you have, it'll actually make it more productive. So just to remind everybody, the whole series is about exploring the gender gap at the top and the changing dynamics of leadership. What I'm going to focus on is something that gets discussed a lot on gender. And, my subject really is that we've got to change the focus from gender to competence. And the reason I say this is because if you think about it, leadership is actually a set of behavior. Leadership is a set of attributes. Leadership is not defined by gender. If we actually begin to define leadership by gender, we're actually simplifying it too much. We're almost saying that all men are certain kinds of leaders and all women are certain kinds of leaders. And we all know that that is not true. As people, we have different attributes and attitudes. Those get displayed in our behavior. That behavior is also shaped as much by our experience and the environment as anything else. So to actually simplify leadership in terms of gender differences is actually shortchanging both the quality of leadership as well as the talent that is resident in individuals, whether those are men or women. So if we think about leadership, the first point I want to really make is that leadership is actually gender agnostic. The second and very important point I do also want to make is that it is not that we are confronting a gender gap at the top alone. We have a gender gap at the top because at some stage we had a gender gap at the bottom, and the bottom over a period of time has further sifted and distilled, with the result that the gender gap at the top is actually more pronounced than the gender gap at the bottom. And if we start questioning it, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this talk questioning that, because we have to figure out a way of dealing with it. The gender gap exists at the bottom primarily because there isn't equality of opportunity and therefore equity as far as the two genders are concerned. The opportunities, at least so far, have been skewed more towards one gender than the other, though the good news is that that is shifting and changing big time. We all very proudly quote statistics about, the gender ratio in primary education and secondary education and so on. The fact that when women are given opportunities, they actually perform very well and very significantly. All of which, to me, goes to show that it is more about opportunity and less about everything else that determines where the whole gender equation ends up. In an ideal world, of course, all opportunities must be sort of equally distributed across genders. So, typically there is some work which is, the more physical labor-oriented work, which perhaps is more skewed towards one gender or the other. But having said that, if you look at all our construction sites, the women are working shoulder to shoulder with all the men. So the first myth I want to actually demolish in this is that leadership has anything to do with gender. Leadership has everything to do with talent. Leadership has everything to do with the opportunity that the talent gets provided. Leadership has everything to do with competency. Leadership has everything to do with education, with skills, with the investment that is made in each of us in terms of our education or the honing in of any other particular skill. Leadership is also about attitude. Leadership is about character. And most of all, when we talk about leadership, we are talking about behavior. I'm using the word leadership in a very informed manner. I am not talking about leaders because somehow, when you talk about leaders, you think about positions, you think about hierarchies, you think about what people are called in organizations. When we talk about leadership as a verb, then each one of us is a leader. Because irrespective of what job we are doing, whether I'm a management trainee, a technical trainee, an accounts clerk, a CEO, a marketing manager, a finance director, it doesn't matter what my title is. I can still display leadership behavior wherever I am. And that is a very, very important distinction to make. Because at the end of the day, we are all judged by our behavior, not by our talk, by what we deliver, not by what we say, by the contribution we make, not the plans that we talk about, by the outcomes that we create, by our participation in teams, by having an understanding of the context in which we operate. That is leadership. Leadership is also character. Leadership is authenticity. I have said this at a talk that I gave earlier today. I think it was Oscar Wilde who said that you've got to be yourself because everyone else is already taken. It is a light-hearted comment, but it is a very deep comment. Unless we are in tune with who we are, we cannot be in tune with the rest of the world. So I urge all of us to really think about our own leadership ability, our own leadership quality, and our own leadership behaviors. Leaders take responsibility to make something happen. Leaders are people who find solutions, not people who make excuses. Leaders are people who take ownership for changing outcomes, which generally would benefit a community, a society, an organization, an institution, and so on. Leaders are also people who work collaboratively. Leaders are not people who are individuals and who dictate so that everybody else does what they are meant to do. So when you think about leadership in the terms that I have just spoken about, where does gender come into the equation? Actually, I could argue that gender is most irrelevant when we start thinking about leadership in the terms that I have just spoken. The fact of our society and our communities is that whether you look at agriculture or you look at corporate India or you look at any other institutions, there seems to be a very, very significant gap between gender in terms of the positions that they hold. And I think if we have to change the top, we have to start thinking about what changes do we want to make at the bottom, what changes we want to make in the middle, and therefore what changes will percolate to the top. And in this context, all of us have a role to play. We have a role to play as professionals. We have a role to play as members of families, because each of us is related to someone who's either a male or a female. And each of us has the power and the potential to influence outcomes both within our families, in our communities, and in the larger ecosystem. So the other point that I want to emphasize, so the first point I talked about is that leadership is a verb, it's not a noun. Secondly, leadership is not a position. Leadership is judged by the behaviors that we display on a consistent and ongoing basis. The third point is that if we are going to close the gender gap at the top, the effort has to be made at the bottom, in the middle, and on top. The fourth point I've made is each of us has an individual role to play as members of families, as members of communities, and as members of large societies and professional institutions that we are all part of. So seen this way, we can actually conclude, or it is certainly my conviction and my belief, that the less we talk about gender when it comes to leadership, the better off we will be, because the more we talk about gender, the more we perpetuate the stereotype that somehow there is a gender bias which is positively biased towards male leaders and not so positively biased towards female leaders. And I really urge everybody on this call to think deeply and profoundly for yourself and see how much of this is as a result of our conditioned minds and how much of it is due to a rational challenge of those conditioned minds. I think if we are to live in a society where there is equity, where there is equality of opportunity, where there is transparency and meritocracy that dictates what positions we hold, then any bias, whether it is a gender bias, an ethnic bias, a racial bias, a community bias, a religious bias, has absolutely no place. I've said this often, and some of you who have heard me talk would have heard me say this, that when any of us walks into a room, whether that is a classroom, an operating theater, a large corporate office, an NGO, we don't walk in with our religion or gender or caste or ethnicity. We walk in with our attitude, a positive attitude, hopefully. We walk in with our experience. We walk in with our talent. We walk in with our conviction. We walk in with our commitment. We walk in with our competency. We walk in with so many other things. We don't walk in with any of the things that actually don't matter. And at the end of the day, if we are all convinced that we want to create and be part of a society that respects and recognizes people for what they are capable of, for what they are able to contribute, whether that individual is an artist, whether that individual is a weaver, whether that individual is an entrepreneur, whether that individual is a corporate executive, whether that individual is someone who comes to our homes every day, cleans our homes and cooks for us. Each of these people is bringing to their work their experience, their competency, and their talent. And all of us need to be able to respect that work and the excellence that gets delivered in that work. I would rather that we spend our energy and effort on actually pursuing excellence rather than debating, things that actually should not matter. So I want to end by saying that we all have a role to play in changing this, and that role is incumbent on the choices we make, the decisions we take, and what we do. And when we talk about the qualities of leadership, there are some qualities that don't change irrespective of what century you belong to or where you live. Those qualities have to do first and foremost, as I mentioned earlier, with authenticity. We have to be comfortable in our own skins before we begin to be comfortable with other people. We have to be good at something that we do. So if you want to be a surgeon, then we've got to study to be a great surgeon. If you want to be a financial wizard, then you've got to study and get the right experience to be that. If you want to be a great teacher, you've got to work towards being a great teacher. So competency comes from practice. Competency and skills are a given, but competency is something that we create. So to give you an example, great athletes are athletes because they go out every morning and they practice what they're really good at. Great artists are artists because they spend a lifetime. They spend a lifetime in practice, in sadhana, as they call it, in really sharpening those aspects of their craft and art which are really going to be able to differentiate them. And it should be no different for corporate executives. So excellence comes as a result of hard work. Excellence comes as a result of discipline. Excellence comes as a result of practice. And there are really no shortcuts to excellence. The third quality of leadership is about strength of character. And that defines the work ethic that we have. And, nobody can teach us that work ethic. It is something that we have to have the grounding and the values and the discretion and the discrimination to be able to judge for ourselves. Many, many years ago, Sir Adrian Cadbury, who I was fortunate to interact with and work with when I worked for Cadbury Schweppes, both in India as well as overseas, had written an article which was a very thoughtful piece of work, and this was published in the Harvard Business Review. And the topic of the article was ethical managers make their own decisions. The point that he was trying to make was that nobody can put themselves in any situation that any of us are going to be confronted by in our lifetime. However, if we have the values and the soundness of judgment and the right discretion and strength of character, we will end up making a decision that is right, not just for ourselves, but also right for the ecosystem in which we operate. When you think about it, it actually sounds quite simple. But actually, the fact is that somehow we are also surrounded by examples that are the right examples of what we are saying, and examples that are examples of behavior that actually is exactly the opposite of what it sets out to do. These are examples of corporations, and corporations are nothing but a set of individuals who get together either as individuals or actually mostly in groups to make decisions that impact not just the business but also society and community. And I think the task of leadership is to engender a situation and create an environment where more often than not the right and the ethical decision gets made in a manner which is comprehensive, in a manner which relates to not just people, but also the environment in which we live. And if that begins to happen, then in many ways, we will not have to put in place systems like CSR, which actually should be embedded into the model of the business, irrespective of what the business is and how it operates. I want to just end up with another example and then open it up for questions. I think if all of us really looked at what we did in terms of a series of relationships, not just with each other, but also with the environment. We would think twice about cutting down a tree that has a relationship with you and me because it provides us the oxygen that is so critical to our well-being. In fact, there was a talk that I heard which estimates that if there were no trees and if somehow, science and technology said we can generate the oxygen that the planet or all of us need to survive, the cost of that would be nothing short of approximately $25 trillion. And there we've got trees around us that are doing this for us free. And we somehow don't think twice about cutting down a tree to create a concrete structure in its place. I know I have simplified this, and I have simplified and exaggerated this for a reason. I have exaggerated this for a reason because if we were to look at individual social responsibility in addition to corporate social responsibility and stop to think about the decisions we make and what is going to be the footprint of that decision on our planet and on our environment, I think we would begin to do some things differently. I think we would begin to use the resources that we have very, very differently. And all of this, why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because all of these are qualities and characteristics of good leadership. Good leadership is when I take individual responsibility, again, irrespective of my gender or any other categorization you want to create. And I begin to think about my role and my position in the world as a series of relationships, not just with people, but with everything that we have around us. The environment, the trees, the rivers, the garbage on the road, anything and everything. Then we will be able to take individual responsibility. And when we begin to take individual responsibility, we can begin to take collective responsibility as well. So I'm going to end my remarks with this thought. I am not going to summarize what I have said because I think I did that earlier. And I want to be able to create enough time for your questions. Now, I'm seeing on my screen some remarks, but can I just request you to put your question very succinctly so that I can see it, read it out to everybody else on the call and begin to take that. Okay, so I'm going to take them in the order, I guess, in which they have come. Let me just see how this works. Okay. So the first question is, as a young woman leader, I often face criticism and are given a hard time from my juniors while getting any work done from them. How do I handle this? First of all, you need to make it very clear to your juniors that we've come here. And if they are your juniors, aren't you kind of responsible in a way, for their behavior? I think it is important for every leader to actually set the rules of the game. People critique us, people criticize us, people say what they do about us and get away with it because we let them. By this, I don't mean that we need to be confrontational in our interactions, but I think it is very important, irrespective of what task you're doing, to set the rules, to create the norms of behavior, to make it known that this is a professional organization and we expect a certain professionalism and behavior from the organization. And I do believe that it is the task of every leader to do that. One of the things I would say to all the women is that you have to have conviction in your ability. If people are testing you to see how determined you are, let them test you. It doesn't matter. You go in there with conviction, with belief, with confidence, and trust me, you will see a change. So what are the most significant qualities one should adopt at leadership level for team impact? I think they are the same as what I have talked about earlier. Leadership qualities are leadership qualities. I think there is one quality which I perhaps didn't mention enough of, and that is an understanding of context. I do believe that that contextual understanding is very, very important and very critical, because if we are going to make a change, then an understanding of that context becomes very important. An understanding of the constituencies that have to be influenced becomes very important. An understanding of the mindsets that we are dealing with becomes very important. The ability to listen carefully becomes very important. So, just because you are in a senior leadership position is no reason why people should respect you, why people should listen to you. They may do that out of fear, but you actually want leadership which comes out of respect. You want leadership that comes out of inspiration, not out of fear. That is the kind of leadership we are talking about. And to create that kind of leadership, you as an individual, all of us as individuals, have to, we have to be prepared to invest time, effort, and energy in creating those equations, in creating the habit of understanding context, of being empathetic. Being empathetic doesn't mean that you have to listen to everybody. Being empathetic means you understand, and the ability to coalesce all those different pieces of information coming out of understanding, etc., is what creates effective leadership. That is what that is what is important in terms of being effective. Leaders or great leaders are remembered because of what they did, not because of what they said. Great leaders are remembered because they created a positive influence, not because they gave big lectures. Great leaders are remembered because they touched the lives of people in some way. And when I'm talking about people, I'm talking about colleagues, I'm talking about customers, I'm talking about clients, I'm talking about everybody that we interact with. I think if we keep that in mind, if we are focused on the purpose, then everything else becomes clear. I've got a question which says, what is the best leadership style? I wish I could tell you. The best leadership style is what works for you. This is not something that you can go and learn. There are leaders and leaders, and there are leaders who are effective with different styles. You have to go and find out the style that is best for you. And the style that is best for you operates from your, it operates from who you are. It operates from your strengths. It operates from what you like to do. It operates from what you are convinced about. It operates from what you are comfortable with. That is why I made the comment earlier that to be a great leader, you first have to be able to lead yourself, which means you have to recognize, who you are, what you like to do, what you do extremely well, what you don't like to do, and focus on those areas that work for you. It is no different from being a great sports person. If you want to be a great tennis player, you have to go out there, practice your serves, practice your forehand, practice your backhand, work on your athleticism. And only then, after years and years and years of practice, do you become, a great tennis player. Think of, think of artists, think of musicians, think of dancers, think of the discipline they have. They create a level of excellence only after they've put in years and years and years of hard work and discipline. And it is no different from leadership. How can HR play a role? HR is an enabler. HR has to make sure that organizations have the processes and systems and metrics. But at the end of the day, people are responsible for people. HR is not responsible for people. So HR has to ensure that the salaries get deposited, that, provident fund happens, and I'm not belittling the role of HR. But, HR has to ensure that the right kind of processes are in place for selecting people, for onboarding people, for retaining people. But at the end of the day, people join organizations and people work with other people. And it is the culture and environment in the organization, and especially in that microcosm of the organization where you are working, that determines how happy individuals are and how engaged they are with the organization. Because that level of engagement is important and critical. If you don't have engaged employees, how can you expect people to give their best? And therefore, the role of HR is there, it is specific, but it is everybody's role to take responsibility for people. As a leader, sometimes I tend to get emotional if some work is not achieved, which I don't see in male colleagues. How to handle that? I mean, the male colleagues have to handle their emotions and you have to handle your emotions. And, why should everybody be like you? I think part of what leaders learn to accept is diversity. What leaders have to accept is difference. And, when we say get emotional, at the end of the day, if we are people, we are all emotional. Some of us choose to show our emotion. Others choose to hide their emotion. There's nothing right or wrong with it. I think we have to recognize that it's not as though we leave our emotion at the door when we come into work and we pick it up when we leave work. We are who we are. And a sign of great leadership, a sign of mature behavior is the ability to handle your emotions. And that is what we talk about when we talk about EQ. EQ is about being aware of yourself. It is about self-awareness. It is about the impact that you have on others. It is about the impact others have on you. And it is about the ability to deal with all those range of emotions that are important and critical to being effective. So, let's not create artificial boundaries and barriers which says at work, I can't be emotional, but the moment I come out of work, I'm going to be emotional. We don't live life in compartments. You have to live life holistically. In some situations, there are certain traits and characteristics that become more important. In other situations, there are other traits and characteristics that become more important. So it's fine. We are all a combination of, emotion and a whole host of other attributes. And we shouldn't be shy of that. Do you have any reference where individuals can take tests online to understand what qualities of leadership I have and how I can improve them? Of course, there are many, many tests that are available. And, some of these have been done over a period of time. You can take on all these tests. The important thing is not to take the test. Of course, if it helps you to understand better who you are, your organization is probably doing that, or you can, go online and take some of those tests. But I would be less obsessed about taking tests, and I would, concentrate more on being aware of the reactions or the responses that you generate in individual situations, in group situations, and so on. I am assuming that all of you on the line are part of either an institution or an organization or are entrepreneurs where you're working with other people. It is good. It is good to get yourself assessed. It's like, it's like going and getting your annual checkup, which tells you physically, how you are. But our emotional checkup is done all the time. Those of you who have kids, you can learn a lot from your kids. You can learn from colleagues. You can learn from family, provided you have an open mind and a great attitude. So the tests are certainly helpful because they enable you to dimensionalize. They enable you to understand what are your strong points and what are your points of development. There are lots and lots of tests. There are lots of leadership assessments, and it will be good to, have that discussion with people in your organization. And, each of these can be very helpful in helping you understand your competencies, your capabilities, and your personal characteristics. How do I align employee behavior? These questions are coming fast and furious. As I aim to become a leader in the future, I think I need to become a good follower first in the early stages of my career. Can you shed some light on how you become a leader? I think that's what I've been trying to do, I hope, for the last 40 minutes or so. I'm reading a lot of very conditioned questions. So, for example, in the early stages of my career, I have to be a follower, and then suddenly at some stage in my career, I become a leader. And I'm saying to you, no. I am saying that you are a leader from the time you step into your kindergarten. How many of you in your student days were leading the Students' Union? How many of you were leading a committee? How many of you were leading a sports team? How many of you were leading the debating club? So somehow we all were leaders. We led something. We led a poetry competition. We led a painting competition. We were all leaders when we went to kindergarten. And then somehow, our education system, and then when we got into the real world, we somehow got into this thing saying we first have to be followers before we become leaders. I am saying to you that leadership is a behavior. It is not a position. So whether you are a management trainee or the CEO, we are all leaders. And that leadership behavior is manifest in the way we bring our talent to work. It is manifest in the way we conduct ourselves at work. It is manifest in the way we do things at work. So it's not that you are first a follower and then you are a leader. However, all of us at all times are both leaders and followers. We have to have the humility and the modesty to say that we learn from everybody and everywhere. I think leaders are consummate learners. Leaders are people who are curious. Leaders are people who will learn from everybody and every experience. That is what distinguishes a great leader from someone who is a mediocre leader. So, just get out of these notions of this has to be this way and that has to be this way. If there is one thing that I would like to succeed in doing as a result of this webinar is to encourage all of you to ask questions, is to encourage all of you to question your own behavior and that of others, but do it in a manner which is respectful. Do it in a manner that comes out of curiosity, not out of authority. Being a leader, should we limit our talks to ensure that juniors don't take you for granted? Lightly or more casual talks with them rather than talking professional only. Again, I'm seeing a lot of us and them. I'm a leader and therefore these people are my juniors. Who says somebody is your junior? Just because they're junior in hierarchy doesn't mean they're junior in stature. So don't confuse your position or your visiting card with who you are. Your position in the hierarchy may be senior because you've just worked more years than I have. But there is no other junior or senior. You may have more numbers of years of experience, but that doesn't make you a more effective leader than me. So again, please do not create these artificial, these artificial dichotomies of, I am senior and I have juniors. You have to relate to people as people. Why should your behavior be different to someone who is reporting to you compared with who you report to? That is where we begin to see all kinds of confused behavior. You have to be yourself and you have to relate with respect and confidence and conviction, whether you're talking to a colleague or to, a new employee or to your CEO or to the president of the country. We confuse ourselves by saying, this is the way I have to appear to my juniors and this is the way I have to appear to my seniors. You're not just doing a double role, you're doing so many roles that you're ending up confusing yourself. Just play your single role, which is yourself. How do leaders create a learning environment? I think that's a very interesting question. We all talk about learning all the time. We talk about learning organizations, and yet, many of us who are in those positions don't create the formal structures to learn. So I do want to touch upon another aspect, and that is informal organizations and institutions. There are both informal processes as well as formal processes. And I think it is important to have a formal process as well. So the formal process that we all go through when we go through education is, we go to school, we go to college, we go to, specialized institutions, and there is both a formal as well as an informal teaching, and then there is experiential learning. There is a whole body of work which also says that how we learn is different. I can tell you, speaking for myself, I'm more of an experiential learner than someone who only learns from books, whereas there are other people who are, who learn from reading and so on. So there's a lot of very good work that is being done on understanding your individual characteristics, traits, on understanding your learning styles. And those are the formal mechanisms that are very, very important in terms of determining how you would learn. Today, there are opportunities to learn everywhere. I learn a lot by, listening to talks on YouTube. There are formalized, very easy mechanisms of learning, whether these are MOOCs or, other short courses that are presented. But I think in an organization, there must be opportunity for formalized learning opportunities. I have grown up in organizations where we said we need to immediately debrief both success as well as failure. We need to do a root cause analysis to understand what created the success and what created the failure. And we need to be able to see how to repeat more of those processes and capabilities that create success and change some of those things that create failures. So each of these things are important. Formal learning is as important as informal learning. But again, learning is something that is very, very individual. It is a state of mind. It is your curiosity. It is, how much you question something that determines how much you learn. So, as somebody said, let's not confuse learning with education. Getting a degree is not education. Learning from everyday life, learning from formal situations. Leaders are also people who invest in their own learning. Leaders are people who invest in their learning both formally as well as informally. So again, it is up to us. How to create motivational atmosphere at workplace. You've got to create an atmosphere which is inspirational. I can't motivate you to do something that you don't want to do. Only you can motivate yourself. I can create an environment. I can create a physical space that is inspiring and that is energizing and that stokes your curiosity. But at the end of the day, you have to be motivated. If you want to lose weight, I can put all the books in front of you. I can tell you all about good nutrition. I can tell you about exercise. I can tell you about the routine you should follow. But if you are not motivated to wake up in the morning, put on those running shoes, hit the gym, or do whatever it is that you like to do, there is nothing that I can do. So a large part of what I am also saying is that there is a great deal of responsibility that we have to take as individuals for our own growth and development. Before you become the CEO of a company, you become the CEO of yourself. And everything that you want to do in your company, you have to do for yourself. Some examples of leadership reading. There is no little nugget. I can't give you leadership in a capsule. I wish it was that easy. I don't know what is leadership reading. I get very inspired when I read biographies of people. I get very inspired when I read biographies of scientists. I remember as a student in school, I was very inspired reading the biography of Madame Curie, and I was very inspired reading the biography of Maria Callas. Now, Maria Callas happened to be one of the iconic opera singers, and Madame Curie happened to be one of our iconic scientists. And I was fascinated by both. So, what is leadership reading? Leadership reading is anything which inspires you. And, you can find that inspiration in a word of fiction. You can find that inspiration in biographies. You can find that inspiration in people that you're interacting with every day. Let me give you the example of staff in my house. For example, my driver. I learn a lot from his work ethic because he is always punctual and never late. He has never made an excuse saying there was too much traffic and therefore I got delayed. And I can tell you, I'm taking flights at ridiculous times, and there has never been an instance where I have got late because he has come late. Now, who taught him that work ethic? Not I. It is something that is his conviction. It is something that is his value. It is something that he prides himself on. It is something that he has learned to do. And therefore, I can tell you, many managers I worked with who came late and who made excuses of traffic. And here I'm giving you an example of, someone who has always shown up punctually, irrespective of the weather, irrespective of the time, irrespective of traffic. That is leadership behavior. Let me scroll. What creates more leaders within an organization? Again, I don't know what you mean by more leaders. I'm saying everybody in an organization is a leader. That is the whole purpose and tenor of my talk. So I am not sure what you mean when you say what creates more leaders. If there are 20 people in an organization, there are 20 leaders in an organization. Now, that doesn't mean, leadership does not mean that everybody in an organization, leadership is not anarchy. Leadership is not that I come in and decide what I'm going to do and you come in and decide what you're going to do. Leadership is executing with responsibility that which you are tasked to do. Leadership is about good governance. Leadership is about understanding how I become a team player. Leadership is about working collaboratively in a team. Leadership is about supporting your team members. Leadership is about working in alignment. Sometimes you lead from the front, sometimes you lead from the back, sometimes you disappear in the middle. That is good leadership. Traits of a good leader, I think I've been saying that for the last 45 minutes. Learning organization we've dealt with. Juniors we have dealt with. How do you help new hires quickly get your business values? That really has to do with, remember one thing, new hires or old hires are very smart people. You can have a great onboarding program. You can have, sessions where you talk about values and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, you will have stickiness of behavior and adherence to values only when people see that your talk and your walk are aligned. If I am saying something and doing something else, it doesn't work. As someone said, your actions speak so loudly, I cannot hear your words. So it's not about what we say, it's about what we do. Of course, organizations have to have onboarding processes and, people have to understand the business model, the values of the business and so on. But at the end of the day, you have to have checks and balances, rewards and penalties, recognition and otherwise of people who live by those values, people who demonstrate those values in everyday behavior, people who exercise good judgment in what is ethical behavior and good conduct. And those need to be rewarded. And if those are rewarded and the others penalized, then you get the entire organization not just speaking or spouting those values, but also living those values in their everyday behavior. Okay. Is a good manager also a good leader? I don't know the distinction between the two. All of us have to manage and all of us have to lead. So, we are all, you can't say that you're a manager and you're a leader. We are all simultaneously managing and leading. With mergers taking place globally, sorry, I lost that question because some other questions came in. There was some question on mergers. There are lots of questions which are repetitive. So I'm going to skip that. There's one which says, as a person moving into a leadership position but still not formally given designation, how should I handle my team when they consider me as leader, but when they do not consider me as leader when management expects me to lead? Again, you are equating leadership with a position. And I'm telling you, I can give you the position of the President of India. But if you don't perform, nobody is going to consider you to be a leader. So do not confuse position with leader. Leadership behaviors everybody recognizes. The fact that you have been promoted and your business card will say something else is something that, you can be happy and celebrate. But that celebration will last a day. What will last forever is how you conduct yourself in that position, how inclusive you make your team feel, how much credit you give to the team, how collaboratively you work, how convincingly you communicate, how you clarify issues, how you demonstrate in your everyday behaviors meritocracy and not some politics of corporate behavior. I think when we begin to exhibit those traits and characteristics, when what is important is the issue at hand, when what is important is the opportunity at hand and not the individual, that is when real work happens. That is when satisfying work happens. So it's not about pleasing individuals, but it is about doing right things. And as somebody said, when you do the right thing, when you are satisfying your customers better than anybody else, then, the business begins to do really well. I used to work for the Coca-Cola company globally, and we had a very iconic chairman called Roberto Gozueta. And he used to tell all of us who were in operating roles, he said, the demand for your stock if you increase the demand for your product, the demand for your stock will go up, and not the other way around. It is not about talking valuations. It is about serving your customers better than anybody else, whether that is a B2C business, a B2B business, a new business, an old business, it doesn't really matter. What creates a successful business is a happy and satisfied consumer. And what creates a happy and satisfied consumer is happy and satisfied employees. And what creates happy and satisfied employees is an environment and a culture where people are given an environment where they can do their best work and where they really take ownership for what is done, where people do work because they want to, not because they have to. So it is not as though, 9 to 5 or 9 to whatever, 9, I'm doing a job and then I come out and have fun. If your work is not fun, if your work is not giving you a kick, if your work is not giving you positive energy, then you really have to step back and think about what that work is. So we are at 1 o'clock, and we started on time, and I do want to finish on time with saying thank you very much for your involvement and participation. I hope some of what I said will be of use to you. You don't have to agree or accept everything that I am saying. Do go back and think about it. Take whatever from this talk works for you. But remember, at the end of the day, before you are the CEO of a company, you are your own CEO. And if you don't take care of yourself, it's very hard to take care of an organization or an institution or anything that you are responsible for. I wish you all the very best, and in anything that you choose to do. Thank you.